Hello everyone. I think some of you have had too much of my contact with this fellowship in a very personal way over the past few years. So in 2014, and it's taken me that long because it has grown like Topsy, and I'm still, I think to say it changed my life is not at all an understatement. So in 2014 I got the National Teaching Fellowship to look at professional recognition of university educators. And it started because I had brought to ANU a scheme called the Higher Education Fellowship Scheme, and that was working so brilliantly at ANU, and I wondered whether it actually had some meaning elsewhere, and so that's where I took it. My fellowship had three goals, really. I was trying to see, are there benefits from professional recognition? So what I mean by that is recognition of someone, not just as an academic, not just as professional staff involved in supporting learners, but as a university educator. So it's somewhat beyond, in other words, the teaching and learning function becoming recognised that this was a professional expertise area. Secondly, the potential impact of this on teacher quality and self-efficacy, both for institutions, individuals, and for educational leaders. And then my passion was around developmental practice and reflective practice being integral to those processes. Were they actually really important, or was it just a ticker box that you could get people to do? So, a couple of definitions. Now, we don't actually have a definition of teaching quality that really works for universities. Schools have done this. And they talk about quality teaching being part of that, evidence-based practice, and quality teachers. So my interest is around the teachers and the people, and especially this idea of self-efficacy, the idea of professionalism and our role as educators, not just as academics who are researchers who are, by the way, can you teach? Which unfortunately is the way many of us still get into the profession. So self-efficacy is something you can achieve, and it's a personal belief. That's really, really important. And it's very, very individual. So it's that you can achieve a satisfactory outcome to a specific task in a specific context. So for me, for example, I believe I can help individual teaching staff reflect on their practice in writing so that they can achieve Higher Education Academy fellowships as professional recognition of their experience and expertise in higher education teaching. So this very, very specific. So self-efficacy is something that can change for individuals across the different subjects they teach, across the different levels that they teach. Now, we've got reward and recognition in universities, and when I started this, there were still university teaching awards nationally. Well, there are still, but there was an ALTF. So we had those sorts of things, peer review, promotion, but my question was about all the others, the ones who can't get promotion because they're sessional staff, the ones who don't get teaching awards, even though they're doing fantastic jobs, because they're not actually doing innovation, which is now one of the criteria. So my interest was for the many, and I unashamedly talk about inclusion and equity as being driving forces and a sort of social justice for educators. What about all of those who are trying to be the best teachers they can be right now? They might not be the best teachers in the world or Australia or their institution or even their discipline, but they're the best that they can be right now. Is there some way we could recognise them? So, self-efficacy. Let me give you a little explanation of this concept from Bandura. It has 4 components. One of them is my own feeling of mastery, how well I've done this thing before. So I've got a reasonable confidence standing up here now that I can talk to you and communicate with you because I've done this kind of thing many times before, and so I feel I'm basing my anticipation of how I will behave on my previous experience. I also have the verbal component of this, people who've told me things about how I do before, because just like many of us, I have imposter syndrome, I don't believe that I'm actually any good, but people keep telling me that I can do this, yes you can teach, and so I use that as part of my self-efficacy. And then I compare myself with others. you know, other people like me, how do they do this? So I've seen all day, I've been comparing myself. People have been standing up, they've been standing here, they've been holding this. I can feel myself fitting into a mould. And then there's the affective. How do I feel today? Now, a couple of weeks ago, I was involved in a car accident. Now, had I then had to go and do a workshop, I don't think I would have been so happy. And I wouldn't have been able to talk to you so comfortably. Qantas lost my suitcase yesterday, so I've got a little bit of anxiety, and they haven't contacted me yet today, so I'm wondering what happens for clothes tomorrow. But anyway, so the affective, we know, impacts on people, and that's why I recommend people who are not well, not coping well, not physically well, don't try and teach. You'll think you're doing it for the best aspect of the students, but they will see the difference between you on a good day and a not so good day. So my hypothesis, because I'm originally trained as a scientist, so therefore I always have to have a hypothesis in there. My hypothesis is that professional recognition would build that personal teaching self-efficacy, and it would build it by having inputs into all these areas. Would it have an input into the affective? Interesting. Because I'm also an academic developer, I also wanted to think about that professional development aspect, and the aim of professional, or the underlying hypothesis of professional development, is that you influence teachers' beliefs and behaviour, and that encourages student-centred approach to teaching. And the things that we have seen, and apologies because the change to the new format has obviously muddled up the layout. Peer engagement, mentoring, discipline, action learning, reflective practice, communities of practice. These are things we know work in professional development of teaching. We're not sure that having a grad cert works, but we know that if the grad cert has these things involved, then it tends to improve teaching. So my idea was to mix those two things together, and I could see the ways that those factors in professional development fed into the self-efficacy. So my interest was, would the professional recognition build teaching self-efficacy, because if you build all these kinds of things into professional recognition. Whoa. I'd forgotten it did that, and it must have been a while ago. So, when I went round Australia on my National Teaching Fellow travels and talked to people about these things, I asked groups of people, tell me what drives you as a teacher, what gives you your self-efficacy. And what upset me tremendously was everyone focused on this student feedback. I don't know if I'm a good teacher unless my students tell me. And that, I think, has changed, and that's because as universities we are now driving everything by our university standardised evaluations. Peer review was a little thing. It was there for some universities that had brought in peer review, and where it was there, it worked very well. Promotion was the way you judge people. If I get promoted, I must be a good teacher, but if I don't, well, then obviously I'm not. And teaching awards added to that idea of normative judgment, but not tremendously, because as Mark Israel showed in his own fellowship work, if you get a teaching award, it doesn't necessarily mean that your institution will value you. And so that's an issue there. And the affective, people were just so demoralised, really, about the way that teaching impacted on their careers. Now, if I go back to 2009 and 2010, the publication of Hamish Coates' work, this is what they said we needed in Australia: calibrated professional standards, a way of assessing performance against those standards, harmonised approach to professional learning that was cross-institutional to ensure minimum standards have been met and ensure portability. And so Kim's work on that MOOC is exactly talking about this stuff, a cross-institutional approach. But of course we didn't have anything in Australia at that stage, and that's why I had to go overseas and found the Higher Education Academy, as it was then, which was an internationally accepted, actually it was still based in the UK until I came along. And I was the person who brought it out of the UK, brought it to Australia, to ANU as the first institution that applied the HEA standards. But what I loved about it was for anyone working in higher education who did these things: experience and knowledge in teaching and learning, professional development, scholarly practice, and a value-based approach to participation, equity, and evidence-based practice. And that's why I liked it. That's why I thought this is a really interesting approach, because here are standards that have values in them, have professional development, have integrity, have evidence-based practice, knowledge, expertise, and are based on experience. So it wasn't about doing a course. You could actually relate it to the experience of the person. And these 4 categories, which I think many of you now know, when I started, nobody knew these categories, and now many of you do. We've got sort of early career, and Mauro talked about the demonstrators, tutors and demonstrators, fellowship, fairly standard, senior fellowship, the leadership comes in, and principal fellow, strategic leadership at that higher level. That was interesting. Okay. And I used the Higher Education Academy. It was, that's right. That's very good. Because it did these things, it had the calibrated standards. There was an existing scheme in place. We didn't have to invent anything. And in 2015, there were 75,000 fellows. Now there are more than 100,000. And that shift has come, it was mainly in the UK, now it's HEA working in 40 countries. So it's been a huge, huge change, and it's pretty exciting that I've been part of that. And the other thing is it is inclusive. It's everybody. Okay, so we've got academics. We've got a Nobel Prize winner, the VC at ANU. Academics at all levels. Students. Students who are peer-assisted learning mentors are contributing to higher education teaching and learning. They can get fellowship recognition. Those who support learning, doesn't matter whether they've got a lot of experience or a little bit, they can be recognised. Doesn't matter whether they're full-time or sessional. Marina knows that this is such an important way of giving sessional staff something back, whether they're award winners, whether they're clinical or practitioners. Tutors and demonstrators, all of these people can be involved. And you probably don't know any of those faces. Well, you might know that one up there. But that's right, because they're not people who are normally in these kind of setups. They're people who are just running their discipline teaching powerfully, thoughtfully, caring for their students. But most of us don't know who they are. And this way they get recognised. So as I travelled around the country, I was very pleased that Qantas decided to support my journey. It was a different kind of recognition. And if you want to talk to me about how I've built Indigenous recognition into this process, please do at one of the breaks, because that is hugely important to me, that we look at the reflective storytelling nature of the process. One of my unexpected outcomes I thought I'd go around the country and tell people about this thing, and then I'd write a report and they'd all go and think about it. In fact, what happened is everybody said, first of all, they said, come and see me. They said, please come to my university because I can't come to you. So I did a lot more travel than I expected. And then they said, we don't want to talk about it, Beth, we want to try it out. That required my employability skills, that required my entrepreneurial skills to come to the fore. And so with these universities, we actually worked with those universities and trial schemes through the ANU HEA accredited scheme. And now many of them, as you know, have their own schemes and have taken off and grown. You know, we were carrying the baby, and now the baby is well and truly outgrown. I also work with many individuals from many different universities, and I'm continuing to do that work, which is just absolutely fascinating. So I ran 2 Australasian symposia on professional recognition in 2016 and 2017. Each one of them had about 20 institutions, different institutions represented, and many of those institutions have now taken up fellowship. What I really was important were that the inclusion, it's developmental, it's internationally recognised. That was very important for me. The developmental aspect of the recognition has come forward. Papers, publications, things like distributed leadership. How do you make this work so it's more inclusive? Impact on professional staff. It's not just for academics. There's a gendered perspective, which I'll be talking at the conference. Seeing Jackie walked in reminded me about community of practice aspect as well. And when I wrote that chapter for Jackie's book, I'd only just started this process. It's a big one. Self-efficacy, did this change? Now, the whole point as a scientist is that having a fellowship, having recognition does not change self-efficacy. Because what you're doing is giving people recognition for what they already do. Right? You're not giving them new skills or new capabilities. But when I asked them if they had become more confident about all these things, they said yes. To me, that's fascinating, because what you're doing is by giving them recognition, you're allowing them to own what they're capable of. And that was very exciting when you get people saying things like this. Recognising different approaches and different student needs is something that's become more important to me since doing this application. And I have got thousands of quotes like that. So these things, inclusiveness, being experiential, reflecting, developmental, having peers involved at every stage, and the international benchmark perspective are key, I think, to the way that this professional recognition has been successful. So my hypothesis has been proven, well, nearly, and I'm very excited to say at least half of Australia's universities and some New Zealand universities are now involved with this. It's usually within a more comprehensive professional learning scheme, and so that's where, again, Kim's work comes in, that professional learning is being, this is just one aspect, it's not just a tick a box. It's crossing academic professional boundaries and continuing and sessional boundaries. It requires people to actually engage with reflective practice on their career. And I have had the most senior people say, I've never ever thought of my career at all in this. And there are some people in the room who you can ask about that I had not ever connected the dots on the way I have become an educator and what I think about education. And it's creating links to academic promotion and teaching focus positions. So if you want to hear any more, including some quotes from people, come and see my presentations at Talking Teaching tomorrow. Thank you.